Shalom Aleichem. Good day. Bruchim Aboyim B'Shem Hashem. Welcome back. This week's Parasha is Parasha's Tetzaveh. It's also a very unique Parasha, Parasha's Tetzaveh, in the way that there's no mention of Moshe Rabbeinu in this week's Parasha, because the Vilna Gaon says, the Gra, Tetzaveh V'Kodesh L'Vrocha, and most weeks, the Yortzeit, Zayin Adar, the Yortzeit of Moshe Rabbeinu, falls out during Parasha's Tetzaveh. And Moshe Rabbeinu requested, even though it was a request that was not necessary, but any word that comes out of the mouth of a tzaddik, Hashem does. So he said, Mecheni no mesefrecha, erase me from your sefer. By the Chet HaEgel, Moshe Rabbeinu requested. So Hashem had to keep that request and kept it only one time in Parasha's Tetzaveh. There's no mention of Moshe Rabbeinu in this week's Parasha. In this week's Parasha, it says in the beginning, V'yikchu alecha shemen zayizach. You should take for the menorah, the menachos, oil, olive oil, pure, and Rashi explains that it has to be pressed, it has to be pure, virgin olive oil. And this olive oil symbolizes the Jewish people. Just like the oil has to be pure, and after it's pressed and squeezed, the virgin oil, the true colors come out. So too is Klal Yisrael in every situation, in every place, every exile. The more they're being pressed and the more they're being prosecuted, this then comes out the strength of Klal Yisrael. Their beauty comes out. Moshe Shera, when the Agudas Yisrael used to say, similar vein, Klal Yisrael is like a tea bag. When you put the tea in hot water, its true colors come out. So too, Klal Yisrael may have issues one with another, but when it comes to stand straight, when we're under pressure, we all unite together. And that is the beauty of Klal Yisrael. We know also that this week in the Parasha, it says that the Kohen Gadol wore a me'il. He wore bells. And the Pasuk says, why did he have the bells? V'nishma koiloi b'voya l'kodesh. You should hear him when he comes to the holy. In other words, it was an announcement before he came, even though Hashem knows everything, but it's teaching us respect and manners, that one must knock before we enter in a closed room. And we learn out from that many halachas of privacy also. So we have to remember that in our lives as well, to emulate. But the Chafetz Chaim asked a question. There was bells, and at the same time there was rimoin, a pomegranate. The pomegranate did not make any noise. It's just an ornament. And the question is, why was that necessary? What's the purpose? There was a bell and a pomegranate. What's the purpose of the pomegranate? It doesn't make any noise. So the Holy Chafetz Chaim says, that's just a lesson Hashem wants to teach us. Sometimes you're supposed to make noise, and sometimes you're supposed to be quiet. Especially when it comes to Lashon Hara or evil speech, we're supposed to hold our tongues and not say anything, just be an ornament. May that be a schus for Shmiras HaLashon for all Jews everywhere. We said that we're going to every week speak about a topic of the Yortzeit. This time, was the Yortzeit of Moshe Rabbeinu, Zayin Adar, who was the founder of the Chevra Kadisha, of the burial society. That while the Jews were busy collecting the riches of the Egyptians after they left, Moshe Rabbeinu was busy looking for the coffin of Yosef. The Jews promised they'll take him up to Israel. And on Zayin Adar, it's a custom in many communities that the Chevre Kadisha fast and they make a Suda, they make a Sudas Mitzvah in honor of Moshe Rabbeinu's Petira. That happens to be today. Today is Zayin Adar. But it's interesting to note that Hashem at the same time hid his burial. Nobody knows where he was buried. There was an optical illusion when he was buried because Hashem didn't want they should make a god from him. But even for us, the Jews, we also don't know exactly where he's buried. And the tzaddikim, especially in the hidden Torah, the Zohar, goes into great lengths to explain that the reason why Hashem didn't want us to know the burial spot of Moshe Rabbeinu is because his power is still continuing today in every soul of every single Jew. Because Moshe Rabbeinu was the leader of Klal Yisrael. And because he was the leader of Klal Yisrael, that's why it's not necessary to have a burial site. Because he is within us. Whoever seeks Moshe Rabbeinu inside him can find him. His power that he gave over, this leadership to the Jewish people, was instilled in every single Jew in every single generation, and we have his power to work along with us. Comes to mind this emes. This Shabbos is also Parshas Zochar. We relay Mochai Timcha Zecher Amalek. We should destroy the remembrance of Amalek. And there's the famous Mishnah that the Mishnah asks, Are the hands of Moshe the one that makes the war or breaks the war? Because it says when Moshe Rabbeinu's hand was up, the Jews won the war. When his hands were down, they lost the war. So the Mishnah asks, what is it, some magic hands from Moshe Rabbeinu? Ella, the Mishnah says, Megillah Loimelach, that when the Jews looked up to the sky, they remembered to pray to Hashem, and thus they won the war. When his hand was down, they forgot to pray to Hashem, they lost the war. But this emes in Parasha Zochar has a very, very interesting question, which is really the answer. And his question is, V'chiyodo shel Moshe miltzis zutrasi? Are the hands of Moshe something to make light about? Something small? Something insignificant? Why is the Mishnah asking, can the hands of Moshe make war or destroy war? So the emes says, of course it could. Look at all the things that Moshe Rabbeinu's hands did. Those hands split the Red Sea. Those hands brought us man. Those hands took care of us. Those hands have tremendous power. Of course, it was all by power of Hashem. But what is the question? Can the hands of Moshe make war? Of course. Of course it could. So the emes answers a beautiful explanation. He says the power of a leader is only aligned with the power of the people that give him the power. Those who listen to him, who obey him. That power he gets. A king, ein melech b'loi like we say in Rosh Hashanah, that's why we have to crown Hashem. Tamlichuni aleichem. Hashem says that we should crown him because there's no king without a nation. So if Moshe Rabbeinu is supposed to have powers in his hand, it's only from the people who are working with him. The Jews, the righteous Jews who are praying and learning, and they can give over, through them, Moshe Rabbeinu gets his powers. He doesn't have his own powers. It comes from the people. And that is the answer. The Gemara, of course, Moshe Rabbeinu's hands has power. But the Mishnah answers that it depends on the Jewish people. When the Jews looked up and they prayed to Hashem, then Moshe Rabbeinu had the power in his hand. Then Yisrael Mishtabnas Limam Shel Shamayim Menatzchen, then he won. But if they didn't concentrate, if the Jewish people did not concentrate, then Moshe Rabbeinu had no powers in his hand. And this same applies also to the Nes from Purim. We know that the whole Megillas Esther, everything was hidden. There's no mention of God's name in Megillas Esther because everything was in the Teva. And the Sesemis there's a different Sesemis on the Teva. The Sesemis writes in Parshas B'Shalach, in the first piece, in Oz Yoshir, the Medrash says, Hadohi D'chsiv, it says, Nochon Kisachom Oz, that Hashem's throne was strengthened when the Jews sang Shira. And the Ramban and all the other Rishonim ask, from Shira, what about when Hashem created the world? Then Hashem wasn't a God until Kriyas Yamsef. So the Sesemis explains in the same vein that we're explaining now, that the Teva, the usual, the nature, God's hand is hidden. We don't see it. When something happens out of ordinary, then we realize that Hashem is the master and Hashem runs the world. And that shows and strengthens God's presence in our daily lives. So therefore, Hashem's name is not mentioned because the whole Nes on Megillas Esther, everything occurred. It looked very natural. It looked like politics as usual, as we always see. And sometimes we forget to look at the brighter picture and forget that Hashem is running the world. Leiv melachim v'sorim b'yad Hashem. I want to wish everybody a good Shabbos and continued success. Hatzlacha Rabbi, and we should be zeicha that ein kisa sholem mechisa sholem ad sheimocha zeh shel Amalek, that Hashem's throne should be complete by bringing Mashiach speedily in our times. Thank you.